In the previous lesson, you learned about views, how to create them, and how to use them. An inline table-valued function is a form of table expression that has several properties in common with views. In this lesson, you'll learn how to write queries that use inline table-valued functions, how to create simple inline table-valued functions, and how to retrieve data from inline table-valued functions. Like a view, the definition of a table-valued function is stored as a persistent object in a database. An inline table-valued function encapsulates a single select statement returning a virtual table to the calling query. And since table-valued functions are stored in a database, this enables reuse and centralized management of code in a way that is not possible for derived tables and CTEs. SQL Server provides two types of table-valued functions: inline, which is based on a single select statement, and multi-statement table-valued functions, which create and loads a table variable. Although inline table-valued functions have so many properties in common with views, the key distinctions between views and inline table-valued function is that inline table-valued functions can accept input parameters. Therefore, you can think of inline table-valued functions conceptually as parameterized views and choose to use them in place of views for occasions when flexibility of input is preferred. Now let's see how to create an inline table-valued function. In order to use inline table-valued functions in your queries, the table-valued function must be created by a database developer or administrator with appropriate permissions in the database. And in order to store an inline table-valued function, you need to use the create function tsql statement to name and store a single select statement with optional parameters. You need to declare the return type as table and use returns table to identify this function as a table-valued function. You need to enclose the select statement inside parentheses following the return keyword to make this an inline function. For example, this query creates an inline table-valued function which takes order ID as input and returns order ID and a calculated field called line total from the sales order details table that match the order ID that is passed as the parameter. And one thing to note when creating an inline table-valued function is that the create function must be the only statement in the batch. Let's take this example and execute and see what the results will look like. Let's open a new query and use the query that we just saw. Click on Execute. Now let's expand Programmability. Click on Functions, refresh it, and expand the table-valued functions. And as you can see, a new inline table-valued function is created. Let's expand this function, and as you can see, order ID is a parameter. Now let's see how to retrieve from inline table-valued functions. After creating an inline table-valued function, you can invoke it by selecting from it using a two-part name. If there is a parameter involved, you need to enclose it in parentheses, and if there are multiple arguments, you need to separate them using commas. For example, in this query shown here, it uses the inline table-valued function, takes 10252 as the order ID, and returns order ID, product ID, unit price, quantity, discount, and line total information for the order IDs matching 10252. You can also notice that an alias is being used for the inline table-valued function. It is always a best practice to assign a table alias to the table-valued function. Now, let's execute this query and see what the results will look like. Before we do that, let's change this function to also return the product ID, unit price, the quantity, and the discount information from the sales order details table. Click on Execute. And now let's use the query that we just saw. Open a new query and paste the query that we just saw and click on Execute. It returns all the information related to the order ID 10252. Now let's create another inline table valued function which takes an input parameter to control how many rows are returned by the top operator. Open a new query and let's say create function. Let's call it production.top_n_products, and let's pass a parameter. Let's pass an integer parameter, and you need to call returns table as return use the select statement, and let's use the parameter that we have here, product ID, product name, and the unit price from production.products order by unit price in the descending order. Let's enclose the select statement in parentheses. And now click on Execute. Refresh the table valued functions, and you can see that this new inline table valued function is created. Now let's open a new query and do a simple select star from production.top_n_products, and let's pass 3 as the parameter. Click on Execute, and it will return the top 3 product information. Now let's change the sales inline table valued function to take in 2 parameters. One is the order ID and the next one is product ID. And let's say product ID equals the parameter. Click on Execute. Let's see how to use this in a query. Open a new query and let's say select star from sales.function line total, and let's pass 10252, the same order ID as before, and pass in 20 as the product ID. Click on Execute, and it will return the order ID 10252 and product ID 20 and the rest of the information that is related to the order ID and the product ID. And as you can see, if there are multiple parameters, you can use comma to separate them. Now that we've seen how to use inline table valued functions, in the next lesson we'll learn about derived tables and how to use them.